I was on orbital patrol above Europa when the message came through, interrupting the low hum of the navigation system and the occasional telemetry blips from the mining operations below. I remember the silence that followed the transmission, as though even the stars paused to listen. The Karzul Empire had declared war on Earth. Not a skirmish, not a border dispute, war. I stared at the encrypted stream pulsing on my display, the Imperial seal flickering like a warning flare from the edge of the galaxy. It didn't make sense. Earth had no territorial ambitions, no contested claims, and we hadn't even been active in any border regions in the last 50 cycles. But I knew enough about the Karzul to understand this wasn't about reason. They didn't move unless they felt threatened. And if they felt threatened by Earth, then something had shifted, something deep. I tapped into the live channels, patching in the military traffic from Martian Command, Luna HQ, and deep orbit surveillance. Everyone was scrambling. The silence in the room was replaced by sharp commands, sensor data relays, fleet logs, and the coordinated chaos of planetary defense protocol. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt a cold clarity washing over me, as if something ancient had stirred inside my bones. This wasn't our first war, just the first time the galaxy knew it. As my ship rotated on its axis, I looked out across the stars. The Kuiper Gate would be the first to breach. That's where they'd come through, like they always did. The Imperials loved their ceremonies. They wouldn't just attack. They'd announce themselves with grand formation, their gleaming fleet formations like a blade held high before the strike. But they didn't know what Earth had become. For centuries, we were the ghost in the galactic machine, always one step behind the older species, seen as clever, curious, maybe even charmingly reckless. We played our part. We let them think we were harmless. We let them believe we needed their trade, their tech, their treaties. But while they debated politics and postured in their councils, we were building. Not just ships or stations, we were building resolve. A culture of survivors who had clawed their way back from climate collapse, AI rebellions, orbital civil wars, and the dead silence of failed colonies. The Karzul thought we were sleeping, that we'd never retaliate with force equal to theirs. What they didn't understand is that Earth never stopped preparing. We didn't broadcast our capabilities. We buried them. Wrapped in quiet black programs, concealed under Antarctic bunkers, hidden in the crust of Mars and the magnetic folds of Jupiter. The message had barely ended when the first reports started streaming in. Karzul scout ships had entered Sol space. They thought they'd catch us off guard. They thought wrong. We were already waiting. Not to plead for mercy. Not to negotiate. But to remind them, when Earth wakes, the stars burn. Back on Earth, they flew me in under full blackout protocol. No transponders, no satellite trail. The ship, a sleek black arrowhead, dropped below radar before it even hit atmosphere. I could feel the rumble as we pierced cloud layers, engines whisper quiet but powerful, like the breath of something ancient and dangerous. We landed in the Urals, deep in old territory most maps didn't bother labeling anymore. No lights, no towers, just snow and rock and the pressure of eyes I couldn't see. Deep Vault 7 wasn't a base. It was a graveyard of the forgotten. The entrance was hidden beneath an avalanche-scarred cliff face, accessible only through biometric authentication and a voice command sequence no one had spoken aloud in 2 generations. The walls inside were made of obsidian-reinforced alloy, darker than space itself, and embedded with silent turrets that tracked every step like coiled serpents. I'd only been here once before, during the Indar crisis, and even then I hadn't gone past the 3rd level. This time, I was taken straight to the bottom. The elevator plunged for what felt like hours, the silence between levels growing heavier. At the final stop, the doors opened to a chamber filled with glass sarcophagi and humming servers. Relics of war, locked away from history. Plasma rifles that had melted cities. Portable wormhole stabilizers with unstable ethics. Even one of the fractured remnants of the old Helix AI, sealed behind triple-layered firewalls and a psychic dampening field. These weren't weapons. They were warnings. The President's voice came through a secured channel as I stood before the command table. Her tone wasn't panicked or even surprised. It was level. Measured. "The Karzul believe we're vulnerable," she said. "Let them. They've forced our hand, and in doing so, they've opened a door we've kept closed for a reason." I knew what she meant. Earth had forged peace not from diplomacy, but from exhaustion. We'd clawed through centuries of blood and flame just to breathe. But buried beneath that peace was a reservoir of fury, memories and technologies we swore we'd never unleash again. The galaxy thought we were naive. In truth, we were restrained. We didn't seek revenge. We sought silence. And now, someone had broken it. A large screen flickered on, displaying Karzul fleet projections. Thousands of ships. Dreadnoughts, carriers, support vessels. Arrogant in their assumption of superiority. They were moving in formation toward Jupiter's orbit, expecting resistance. Not annihilation. We don't need to show them everything, the President continued. Just enough. Just enough to remind them that Earth may be silent, but we are never asleep. I stood there, absorbing the weight of her words, the gravity of what was about to happen. We weren't planning for survival. We were preparing for demonstration. Not just to the Karzul, but to the galaxy itself. They had woken the wrong species. And soon, they would learn what we buried beneath our silence. The Karzul fleet arrived with all the pomp their empire was known for, rows of dagger-shaped warships stretching across the void like a steel curtain, banners of ionized plasma trailing behind them, broadcasting their presence in every frequency from radio to subspace. To them, it was art. A performance. A ritual of intimidation. But to us, it was a predictable script. Their first wave came through the Kuiper Gate at 0300 Sol time, right on schedule. It was a calculated move, meant to show dominance by entering through a well-monitored sector, the kind of tactic they'd used for centuries on primitive colonies. They didn't bother cloaking. They didn't jam our signals. They wanted us to see them coming, to feel overwhelmed before the first shot was even fired. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that the Kuiper Gate wasn't just an entry point. It was a trap. Decades ago, we'd repurposed the surrounding regions with deep-field null space emitters, black-site defense arrays, and sentinel drones built from hybrid tech we salvaged from extinct species the galaxy still pretended didn't exist. We had studied every known tactic the Karzul had ever deployed. And we had planned for this exact moment. The first of their scout frigates disintegrated less than 30 seconds after crossing the threshold. No missiles. No beams. Just silence, followed by cascading implosions as the ships folded in on themselves, torn apart by gravitational distortions we'd tuned specifically for their hull composition. The rest of the formation stalled, momentarily. Then came the panic. Tight beam orders screamed out across the void, ships breaking formation to maneuver, to scan, to find the enemy. But there was no enemy in sight. Just black. Stillness. And then, more silence, as the second wave vanished. I was stationed aboard Vigilance Arc, one of our Ghost-class observation vessels, cloaked so deeply it didn't even register on our own systems without a hardline tap. From our perch just beyond Neptune, we watched the Karzul strategy collapse in real time. They were used to overwhelming resistance, to blunt force retaliation. What they weren't prepared for was surgical precision. No grand battles. No fleets meeting in the open. Just disappearance. Cold and surgical. We weren't just fighting. We were dissecting. Back at Central Command, Earth's official response was broadcast across all known channels. A simple message: we acknowledge your declaration of war. We decline your terms. It was the first time the galaxy heard our voice without filters or fear. And it shook them. As the Karzul ships scrambled to regroup, their generals must have realized too late that they hadn't invaded a planet, they'd stepped into a crucible. One forged by centuries of survival, betrayal, and hard-earned unity. The war had begun. And they were already losing. They thought they could terrify us with numbers. But we had something they didn't understand. Intent. I remember the silence in the war chamber aboard the Absolution just before we entered Karzul space. The ship, a Titan-class dreadnought wrapped in neutron shielding and quantum mist, didn't hum like other warships. It breathed. Each movement was deliberate, patient, like a predator stalking prey it had already cornered. Built in secrecy, powered by exotic matter harvested from the ruins of a dead star, the Absolution wasn't designed to fight. It was designed to end wars. Task Force Scorch had been assembled long before the declaration ever came. I was briefed only after the second Karzul fleet was neutralized. Our mission wasn't conquest. It wasn't retaliation. It was exposure. We were to burn down the myth of Karzul invincibility, not with brute force, but with precision and humiliation. The Empire's strength was built on fear. We were going to make them afraid of their own shadow. Our first destination was Kazex Prime, a fortress world at the edge of their core systems. Their defense grid was legendary. Multi-tiered orbital stations, planetary shields powered by an artificial sun, an entire moon converted into a missile platform. Any sane strategist would have avoided it. But that's exactly why we went. We arrived through a silent slipstream corridor, one of Earth's best-kept secrets. Their sensors didn't even register our presence until we were already inside their orbit. We launched a series of electromagnetic pulses that disabled their early warning systems, not with violence, but with precision programming. Their orbital stations froze mid-rotation, turrets locked in stasis, missiles dead in their tubes. The moon gun never even warmed up. We didn't destroy the planet. We didn't even touch the surface. Instead, we broadcast live footage of their compromised systems to every communication node across the Empire. Their own people watched, helpless, as their mightiest world was rendered naked in minutes. The message was clear: Earth wasn't fighting for territory. We were dismantling legends. And then, something unexpected happened. Rebel signals started to ping from within the system. Not human, *Karzul star. Underground factions. Resistance cells. Former slaves. Old enemies forced into silence by centuries of imperial rule. They saw what we had done, and they started feeding us coordinates, codes, encrypted backchannels. It was as if they'd been waiting for this, for someone to show them the Emperor could bleed. In every system we passed, more voices joined the chorus. Freighters refused to resupply the fleet. Engineers sabotaged reactors. Soldiers turned on their commanders. The fear that held the Empire together cracked like glass under pressure. We didn't need to fire on their cities. We just lit the match and watched the lies burn. The Karzul had declared war on Earth. But now, their empire was fighting itself. And we were simply pointing the way. The plan was simple. One transmission. One voice. Every system, every screen, every satellite and subspace relay. Not a declaration of dominance, not a threat of destruction, just the truth. For centuries, the Karzul had shaped the galaxy through fear, rewriting history with fire and silence. But Earth was about to tell a different story. One they couldn't erase. We called it Operation Echo. From orbit above the now-silent Kazex Prime, we initiated the broadcast. It began not with images of war, but with faces, scarred, silent, and real. Survivors of Karzul purges. Worlds razed to ash. Cultures buried. Names lost. And then the data followed. Sealed records recovered from hijacked servers, footage of summary executions, the destruction of peaceful vessels, and the chemical sterilization of entire planetary populations. Crimes too vast for numbers. It wasn't just our story. It was everyone's. I stood on the deck of the Absolution as the galaxy watched. Billions of eyes. Some weeping. Some enraged. Others stunned into silence. The Karzul had always relied on their enemies remaining isolated, divided, afraid to speak, too scattered to unite. But we had connected the dots, and now those dots were burning across the stars in red. I watched as their capital's communication towers went dark, not from sabotage, but from shame. Their state networks cut the feed, but it was too late. The message had spread, copied across civilian networks, shared on pirate bandwidths, echoed by resistance cells, replayed by interstellar news streams that had once called us primitive. Across the stars, the myth of Karzul supremacy cracked open like a rotten shell. And it wasn't just moral collapse. Strategic command centers began hemorrhaging personnel. Officers defected. Civilian riots erupted on outer colonies. Entire mining stations went on strike. Karzul generals found themselves trapped behind their own lines, cut off from supplies, surrounded by former subjects who had seen the truth and now wanted justice. Back on Earth, we monitored it all. No shots fired. No fleets launched. Just the truth, weaponized like never before. The President issued a single line in a follow-up statement. Humanity remembers. And we don't forget those who suffer. It was the moment the war ended for many, Not in surrender, not with a treaty, but with awakening. We weren't just fighting the Karzul anymore. The entire galaxy was. I received encrypted signals from species that had never spoken to humanity before. Some offered alliances. Others offered apologies, for doubting us, for staying silent, for underestimating what we truly were. We hadn't just survived. We had become the axis around which a new truth spun. The Karzul built an empire with fire. We tore it down with memory. And the galaxy finally listened. The capital of the Karzul Empire was a fortress draped in shadow and arrogance. Zelthuan, they called it, a city of obsidian towers and crimson banners, surrounded by orbital rings layered with weapons platforms and defensive satellites that glittered like teeth. For generations, it had been untouchable. The seat of a 1,000-year empire, carved into the crust of a planet scorched to deter landing. No one approached without kneeling first. We didn't kneel. The absolution entered the system unchallenged. Not because the defenses failed, but because the command chain had already collapsed. Their generals were in hiding. Their admirals, missing or dead. The loyalists that remained watched us come closer and chose not to die for a throne that no longer inspired fear. We approached through the upper atmosphere, cutting through thermal storms that once vaporized enemy fleets. Our ship didn't flinch. We came not with an army, but with evidence. Not with a fleet, but with purpose. I led the landing party. A delegation of 10. No guards, no armor. Just black formal dress and encrypted tablets filled with war crimes, casualty logs, classified orders, the truth, curated and absolute. We were met at the outer chamber of the Imperial Citadel by silence. Not resistance. Not gunfire. Just silence. It was louder than any battle I'd ever fought. Inside the throne room, the Emperor waited. Draped in ceremonial armor, aged and still, like a fossilized god staring at his extinction. I remember how he looked at me. Not as an enemy. Not even as a soldier. But as a mirror. His gaze wasn't hatred. It was resignation. "So," he said, his voice hollow beneath the golden helm, "the Terrans arrive not with swords, but mirrors." I handed him the tablet. He didn't even look at it. He already knew what was on it. He had written much of it himself. "I used to dream," he said quietly, "that our empire would outlast the stars. That we were the fire and the others, the kindling. But we forgot the truth. That fire burns out. That kindling learns." He removed his crown. Slowly. Reverently. And then he knelt. That single movement sent shockwaves across the empire. Every camera, every drone, every relay node captured it. The Emperor of Karzul, kneeling before a Terran. Not in surrender, but in understanding. "I cannot undo what was done," he said. "But I can end it." No dramatics. No explosions. Just a throne left empty and a regime crumbling under its own weight. We took nothing. No territory. No tribute. We left behind a single data archive, uncensored records, for every citizen to see. We didn't destroy their civilization. We gave it back to them. And as we walked out of that room, leaving the crown on the cold black floor, I realized something that stayed with me ever since. Humanity didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we remembered who we used to be, and vowed never to become it. They said the Empire would collapse into chaos, that the power vacuum would spark civil war, that Earth would be dragged into the mud of galactic politics, forced to rule what it had dismantled. But none of that happened. Not because it was impossible, but because we didn't stay. We left. Task Force Scorch withdrew from Karzul space within 24 hours of the Emperor's surrender. We left behind no occupying force, no puppet leaders, no Terran flags draped over scorched soil. We weren't conquerors. We weren't even victors in the traditional sense. We were the warning carved into the bones of history. I returned to Earth with silence in my ears and the weight of what we had done pressing into my lungs. From orbit, I watched our planet spin, blue, green, fierce in its quiet resilience. Still scarred from centuries of struggle, still alive, still defiant. It didn't look like the home of a superpower. It looked like the eye of a storm that had finally learned to be still. I walked through the streets of New Geneva 3 days after my return. No parades. No military banners. Just people going about their lives. A child running through a fountain. A vendor arguing over the price of oranges. A street performer playing old Earth jazz on a solar guitar. Life, unchanged. And yet, everything had changed. The galaxy watched us differently now. Not with condescension. Not even with fear. But with something else, something older. Reverence, maybe. Or caution. Maybe both. Our message had been simple. We do not seek war, but we will end it. We will not rule, but we will remember. And if you threaten us, we will not shout. We will answer. Over the following weeks, delegations began arriving on Earth. Some came with apologies. Some with treaties. A few with nothing but silence in their eyes and old pain in their hearts. The Karzul were not destroyed, but reborn. Not by us, but by their own people, now free to decide their future without chains. I was summoned once more to speak before the Earth Assembly. Not as a soldier, not as a war hero, but as a witness. They asked me what I thought the galaxy would remember. I told them they'd remember the silence. The terrifying, deliberate silence of a planet that didn't boast, didn't bluster, didn't threaten, just acted. A silence that came not from ignorance, but from history. Hard-earned, blood-soaked history. Humanity had always been underestimated. Too emotional, too divided, too reckless. But they never saw the truth. We are all those things. But when we unite, when the flame inside us is focused, tempered by memory, and fueled by justice, we don't burn worlds. We change them. So yes, the Empire declared war on Earth. And Earth didn't just win. We reminded the galaxy who we are. And who we never want to be again.